everyone, it's Sevy. With Genshin 2.6's arrival, new and old players are getting another chance to snag their resident drunk/tone-deaf bard/animo archon, Venti. If you were around long enough, we can recall how OP his crowd control and DPS capabilities were in the beginning of the game, a status that persisted throughout the version 1.0 iterations. I cannot emphasize enough just how useful he was then. Over time, Hoyoverse introduced enemies that countered Venti, like Inazuma's Kairages, whose weight were eventually nerfed, and new ruin monster types. And in the recent Floor 12 of Spiral Abyss, the trend is that its bosses are hard counters to Venti's suction and grouping mechanics. Kazuha was also introduced, who has certain utilities that Venti does not, leading to some recent comments of how Kazuha just outright replaces Venti. So, given all these developments that have happened since 1.0 up to now, is Venti still worth pulling? In this video, I'll give my reasons why I think Venti is still relevant and worth pulling, and some reasons why you may want to skip him. For my disclaimer, as always, what I will discuss are just my thoughts and recommendations. At the end of the day, pull who you want and do what brings you the most satisfaction. With that, let's get started. First, we'll go through the reasons what makes Venti great then and now, and why he's still worth it. First of all, for players just starting out whose roster is still very limited, Venti will make most of your journey through Teyvat a breeze, from Mondstadt to Liyue and even still in Inazuma. In his first release, he made much of the game easy. Open world fights, domain farming, and early Spiral Abyss, Venti dominated them. World exploration and getting collectibles were easier thanks to his lifting mechanic. After all,
wouldn't gliding be faster?
And these points are still applicable even now. You can also easily farm his mats since they're all in Mondstadt, unlike Inazuma characters who are locked until you reach the island. And while farming for Viridescent Venerer is a pain in general for your animo units, Venti is relatively easier to farm for, as he can operate on attack crit builds almost as well as EM builds or hybrids, so artifact farming for him isn't too strict. Going more into Venti's characteristics, he is one of, or perhaps the best crowd controller by far. Against light enemies, Venti is easily OP, sucking in the suckers to either be obliterated by his own damage or by other teammates, and there are still a lot of them. Against certain heavier enemies, Venti can still pull them in and clump them, albeit slowly, and he won't completely disable them. Still, it's a form of crowd control that can be valuable in certain situations. In such moments where his suction is applicable, it works wonders. Rather than going through the hassle of running around or implementing more conscious positioning tactics, you'll feel thankful that Venti is there to make life much easier. Thanks to his crowd control utility, you'll get access to awesome freeze teams and the meta-certified Morgana comp. If you love your freeze teams, Venti's a great unit to have. But regardless, he's a flexible unit to team comp with, even outside freeze teams. Many teams in general will benefit from his grouping, resistance shred, and energy refunding passive. Plus, let's not forget that while Venti is an awesome crowd controller, he also deals a lot of damage while doing that, given his own damage multipliers and infusing his burst with elemental damage. He's also the only animo unit that really has high utility to comp with Geo-based teams, aside from Xiao and his Geo supports. For instance, his grouping is useful for Ningguang's small AoE attacks, Albedo's burst can turn into quadratic scaling when grouped by Venti, and Ito can still reach enemies lifted up by Venti's burst. In such cases, Venti can use an attack crit build here instead of EM, since Geo can't be swirled and he'll still be a strong member. One more small note is, due to how well he can group overlapping enemy hitboxes, certain characters with small splash attacks like Kokomi or Yae can take advantage of his grouping to deal AoE damage. While his powerful suction is countered by certain enemies in more recent updates, his energy refund passive is still really useful, especially against enemies that don't give you a lot of energy particles and orbs. Still, the meta can always change to make his black hole utility gain even more or newfound value again, like the future enemy types in the next areas and regions. But even with all these reasons, I can't deny the simple allure of collecting all Archons. It's a safe assumption that Hoyo won't just abandon him given his Archon status, and will of course find ways to make him still be good, tempting, and meta throughout the game's lifespan. So what are the reasons to actually skip Venti? Well, Kazuha's rerun is very highly anticipated, and many players may not be sure if they should choose one over the other, and if so, who to actually pull for. There are some good reasons to lean towards Kazuha. While he doesn't have the same potency of Venti's crowd control, Kazuha's team damage buff is really strong. You can view Kazuha as just being generally great in situations you want a VV Shredder unit. Venti can be situationally OP, yes, but in situations where the suction's utility isn't taken advantage of, Venti performs somewhat worse than Kazuha's generalist Animo kit. Venti is also on his third banner at this point, while Kazuha's only had one, and some players already regret missing it. So if you're a long-time Kazuha saver, you may feel the need to skip Venti. As for team comping, he's not completely essential for any team comp outside of the Morgana team. And while I mentioned that he is really good for freeze teams, Sucrose, Kazuha, or even Animo Traveler can still do the job in such teams. The same is true for Taser teams and most other reaction-based teams. So if you decide to skip him, other Animo units can still fill in for those VV holder crowd controller functions. In terms of gameplay, Venti is pretty much an easy burst and switch kind of bard, but he does have certain gameplay quirks that can be a bit annoying and might not suit your playstyle. For one, his burst lifts enemies high enough that some abilities, especially melee attacks, will be useless in trying to reach them, unless you stand on GeoMC's skill. His black hole targeting can also be uncooperative at times due to its auto-targeting nature. There is a back-to-the-wall trick you can use to better ensure his burst targets more reliably, but it will still usually have problems against Sissenflies and Spectres. These aren't necessarily deal breakers, as these gameplay quirks can have workarounds anyway, but just be aware of this. So to answer the ultimate question, is Venti irrelevant? I say no. It might seem like he fell off the meta due to certain enemy types, Abyss floor 12, and occasionally floor 11, leading to some saying that he's rendered nearly useless. However, there are still so many instances that players can appreciate him in, and certain enemy counters do not erase or invalidate the many other benefits that Venti provides. Hoyoverse had to work hard to introduce many counters to him, which shows that he was really such a strong unit to begin with, and there may be new future developments that make Venti's powerful crowd control utility gain newfound relevance. If you like him as a character but are bombarded by many comments that Kazuha is better, that shouldn't dissuade you. Kazuha does not completely replace Venti. Rather, Kazuha is an alternative that can be better than Venti in certain situations, which goes both ways. Either way, having Venti can still be a great long-term investment for your account, and there will always be situations for both old and new players where his crowd control, DPS, and support capabilities will make the game infinitely easier. So everyone, that's going to be all for this video. Comment down below if you're pulling for Venti on this rerun, and if not, who your primos are going to next. I would love to know. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't already for more Genshin Impact guides and content, and I will see you all soon. Take care!
Let's go! The world is full of lost ballads just waiting to be rediscovered.